Warning: some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Valerie was 24 years old and worked at Barnes & Noble in Scarsdale, New York. Her family described her as a loving and caring person. She wouldn't go out looking for any trouble. Valerie had a very close relationship with her family and friends. Whenever she wasn't working, she loved to relax and was laid back. Valerie, who dreamed of becoming a tattoo artist, would suffer from anxiety and depression. Hours before she disappeared, Valerie called her mother. When she spoke to her mother, she was described to be speaking super fast and stumbling over her words. Her mother thought Valerie could be having a panic attack. Valerie told her mother that someone wanted to kill her. Her mother asked if it was her ex since they recently broke up. She would answer by saying no. See, Valerie was scared and she didn't know what to do. She told her mother she thought she was having an anxiety attack and just needed someone to speak to. Valerie's mother thought her daughter was in danger with her ex since he was known to be toxic and would stalk Valerie. The couple dated for a bit, but it was short-lived when Valerie called it quits due to how toxic and controlling he was. Once they broke up, he tried to keep talking to her, but she refused. Valerie would go to sleep and wake up with messages from Javier telling her how he missed being a couple, and other times he would tell her how he hated her. When Valerie told her mother she feared for her life, she wouldn't say why she believed this, but she was frightened and was suffering anxiety attacks. Norma, her mother, tried to push for details. Had someone been to her apartment? Had she been threatened? But Valerie wouldn't reveal any more. After they ended their call, Valerie sent her mother a goodnight text letting her mother know she was fine and that she would be getting ready for bed. The next day she was scheduled to work, but she was a no-show. When she never arrived at work, her manager called her mother, and after speaking to her, Valerie's mom would call and report her daughter missing. She was concerned about her daughter since she never showed up to work. They also had plans to go shopping in the afternoon, and her daughter wasn't replying to any calls or text. When the detectives started looking into why Valerie went missing, they were told by one of her friends that they had seen her near the Rochelle train station before she went missing. Valerie was reported missing on the 28th of January, and detectives found surveillance footage of Valerie in New York City near a Chase Bank at 6:30 in the morning on the 30th of January. Detectives investigated her phone records. The last time she had activity was when she spoke to her mother. 8 days after Valerie and her mother last spoke, highway workers would stumble across a suitcase on the side of the road. Valerie's dead body would be discovered about 14 miles from her home, in a wooded area about 20 feet from the road. When the detective opened the suitcase, Valerie's legs and arms had been bound with duct tape and twine before she was stuffed into the bag. Several layers of tape had been placed over her mouth, and there was evidence of a head wound and bruising to her face. It was a devastating discovery for Valerie's family. A coroner determined that she had died from asphyxiation.
Police in Greenwich today identifying the body found inside a suitcase as missing 24-year-old Valerie Reyes.
Yeah, she disappeared from New Rochelle last week, and right now, as we just showed you, that vigil is being held for that woman as police continue to search for her killer.
That you can see part of the close-up of the vigil. They've had prayers, they've had remembrances of this young victim as well, but as you can well imagine, the grief is great as soon as they found out earlier today of this young murder victim.
Very humble Val, very strong-minded, very loving, silly.
Norma Sanchez cannot believe she is gone, taken from her and her family, murdered, and her body dumped on the side of a road.
Did somebody mention to her somebody's out to get you or something?
So many unanswered questions. And while her mother says Reyes sought treatment for anxiety and depression, her disappearance for 9 days was unusual.
It was eating us up every single day, every single night, not knowing if she was eating or not knowing if she was cold.
Valerie Reyes' body was discovered early Tuesday morning, here alongside Glenville Road in Greenwich. Her hands and feet were bound and she was in a suitcase. A highway worker made the shocking discovery.
A week later, it was revealed that someone had used her bank card to withdraw money from her account. Surveillance footage showed a man wearing a black hoodie. He was in a rental vehicle that was traced back to someone named Javier da Silva Rojas. Javier was Valerie's ex-boyfriend, and they had been broken up for several months before she went missing. Detectives didn't understand why he would have Valerie's debit card if they weren't dating and hadn't been dating for months. A forensic team found DNA on the suitcase and under Valerie's fingertips. When detectives ran the DNA through the database, they received a match and it returned to Javier. After he was arrested, detectives questioned Javier, who admitted he did visit her on the night of the 28th of January. Although they hadn't been together for over 9 months, he claimed they'd had rough sex, during which Valerie had fallen and hit her head. He panicked and bound her in duct tape before shoving her in the suitcase and dumping it. He told the detective how he freaked out and that it was a horrible accident. Investigators didn't believe his story. If it was an accident, why hadn't he called an ambulance? Valerie didn't die from the head wound, she died from being suffocated. Detective figured out that Javier had gone to Valerie's apartment in the car he had rented. Before entering, he turned his mobile phone to airplane mode and switched off the location setting, suggesting to the detectives that he was covering his tracks from the start. He had full intentions of hurting Valerie that night. Once Javier was inside, the pair had a violent altercation that resulted in Valerie suffering a blow to the head. She was still alive when he bound and gagged her with duct tape and put her in the suitcase. He then put the suitcase in the car and drove it to the dumping ground, where he tossed the suitcase into the wooded area. Javier didn't know whether Valerie was dead or alive, and he didn't care. He also threw her phone away, hoping it wouldn't be found. Javier would then jump in the car and start to steal her money. In the hours after her death, Javier began to withdraw cash from her account at a few Chase banks and local ATMs. Javier took a total of $5,350 from Valerie's bank account. He also sold her iPad. These weren't the action of someone who did it by accident. Javier, 25, was charged with kidnapping resulting in death, and in February 2020, he pleaded guilty. Under his plea deal, he avoided the death penalty. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. He will probably be deported afterward. See, Javier worked in a restaurant, but unknown to most of the people around him, he was in the country illegally as his visa had expired. The court also heard of the call Valerie made to her mother the day before her death, when she said she feared for her life and thought she would be killed. Although she hadn't given any more details, she had been scared. While in court, Javier's lawyer maintained that he felt remorse for his crime. But it was pointed out that while Valerie's family was desperately trying to find her, he had been stealing her money and trying to cover up evidence of his deed. In a statement in court, her mother said, "You, Javier, deserve nothing but pain and rejection. I want you to hear the words of a mother whom you devastated by taking away my baby girl." She was crying as she described the joy Valerie had brought to others and told her daughter's killer has a worthless soul. In tears, Javier responded, "No words can express how repulsed I am by the acts I committed. I will never forgive myself for that. I cannot ask to forgive me because I don't deserve it. I would like them to know I'm very sorry."
A 30-year prison sentence for the man who killed Valerie Reyes, the New Rochelle woman who disappeared from her home in January of 2019.
A judge called Javier da Silva evil and his crime sickening.
Has left the U.S. courthouse in White Plains after an emotional courtroom confrontation, crying as she described her beautiful daughter as someone who brought joy to those who knew her, and directly addressing the man who killed Valerie, telling Javier da Silva he was a worthless soul. You deserve nothing but pain and rejection. Valerie Reyes vanished in January 2019. After a week of anguish, her body was found in a suitcase dumped in Greenwich, Connecticut. Da Silva, briefly her boyfriend, had taped her mouth and bound her hands, leaving her to die. He raided her bank account, stole her iPad, and traded it for electronics he showed off with in this picture. He lied to investigators, claiming he panicked after Valerie fell, before admitting guilt last year to a federal crime, causing death during a kidnapping.
The judge told Javier, "What you did to this woman was sickening. Anyone who could do such a thing is not a good person. By definition, anyone who can do a thing like that is an evil person. Justice requires an evil deed be punished by a lengthy prison sentence. It remains unclear why he killed Valerie, but her final moments were unthinkable. He is currently serving his life sentence in prison and will be there for the next 30 years, hopefully living a miserable life.